Welcome to Church History 401CH. Welcome to session 10. Welcome to How did anyone get converted after the fall of Rome? Now, I really need to give thanks to Moira Aston, the other tutor on this course, because when I first started out, she gave me her notes. And so this is a good deal where her notes kick over. But I should say that I have made a good serious go at them, so that they're really my notes now. So any complaints, I should really accept myself. But I wanted to pass a little bit of thanks on to Moira for her help in that. We're going to we'll see if we can get as far as icons in this little taster as we look at chapter 10. And we're looking at opportunity or threat. What is it that you see in the midst of this chaos that's going on in the world? Do you see an opportunity or do you see a threat? So here we have the fall of Rome. We're going to be looking at the conversion of kings, the growing division between west from east, and we should, I hope, get onto the use of icons and what that's all about. So, this is about the increasing reliance by Western Pope on Western power, calling less on the East for help, and it's about the gospel spreading by the conversion of kings, by invitation and by language of the liturgy. Actually, I won't touch on the language of the liturgy bit, that's in the last pages of this section. You can read that for yourself. So, we have the fall of Rome. And the last that we heard of it, we were talking about Chalcedon 451. That's where we were before we went off to Britain and the Synod of Whitby 664. So we've now rewound just a little bit. And you have this Alaric, king of the Visigoths, and he invades, and in 410 he storms and sacks Rome. And it's difficult for us to comprehend the scale and significance of what that means. Precious Rome, that has always been the centre of civilization for as long as anyone can remember. And here it is now defeated by these Arian Christians, by the way. Anyway, there's a bit of a kick up and a stink and a complaint. Oh, it's our fault. We should have stuck with the pagan gods. If only we'd stuck with the pagan gods. So there's a bit of a stink there. And Augustine writes this book, The City of God, in which he compares the two cities of God and the city of man, and how the loss of goods should not devastate us because we are part of the city of God. But these two cities coexist inseparably in this world. Now, here's what's interesting. Alaric withdraws, and then later Attila the Hun, 452, he comes and invades Italy. And it's Pope Leo I who goes out to them and says, "Would you mind awfully if you don't?" And they withdraw. It's the Pope that does this, not the Emperor who does this. The Vandals come, 455. Again, it's Pope Leo I who goes out to them and says, "Would you mind awfully not?" And they don't, not the Emperor. So you can see how there's this growing gratitude, appreciation towards this Pope who has managed to bring peace in a way that the Emperor couldn't. And so kudos to the Pope here. Now along comes Odoacer in 476, and he deposes the last Roman Emperor of the West. And so he then sends a letter to Constantinople, to the Emperor of the East, to say, is there any chance you could recognise me? Because that would be rather nice if you did that, and then I get to be Emperor of the West. So this is where I'm seeking an Eastern Emperor to recognise me as the Western Emperor. And I need you to be able to do that. And we're going to explore a little bit shortly about who gets to make what sort of powers and who needs who. As we're looking at conversion, which we're just about to do, think less in terms of that individualistic sense of me, myself, needing to say some sort of Jesus prayer, so I am now a Christian, and more in terms of seeing, oh look, my king has just become a Christian, I better become a Christian too. So that sense of corporateness, rather than that Cartesian cogito ergo sum approach, we have this corporateness. Really good book that I should wave at you at this point would be Vincent Donovan's Christianity Rediscovered, about his mission amongst the Maasai and their understanding of people as community, not as people as individual. And I think from that it's a very helpful way of seeing what's going on in these earlier times. Now we come to Clovis. Now Clovis, he's going to be important, so this is a bit of a longish story. And Clovis is a proper pagan, but somewhere along the line he says to God, look, if you give me a military victory, then all right. And he gives, he succeeds in battle. And so Clovis gets baptized. We see here the power of prayer and war resulting in kings converting. And we see also marriages, or what other people call flirt to convert. We see marriages being a useful tool in mission. We saw that a bit, if you like, with Queen Bertha in England. So you convert an area by converting one king at a time. Now, Clovis, he is king of the Franks, and they form an alliance with the Pope. And so now the Pope has got a bit of military might to support him. Nonetheless, still in the areas that that the king rules, he gets to say who he wants as bishops in his territory. So civic power is appointing spiritual authority, if you like. Now, that continues through the line, and we end up with a guy called Charles Martel. He becomes king of the Franks, and he expands the territory, and he's most famous for defeating the Muslims at the Battle of Tours in 732. And in the process of that, the Pope gave him quite a lot of land. If I've understood that right, the church gave him a lot of land, and he sort of forgot to give it back afterwards. Funny how these things happen. Now, Charles Martel has two sons, and the one we're going to focus on is Pepin, also known as Pippin the Short. He becomes king of the Franks, and he does, again, he wins some battles, he reconquers some land, and Pippin then proceeds to give it to the Pope. We think he gave the church most of Italy at this time. And the Pope gives to Pippin the Short a title, and protector of the Romans. He gives them a title. So there you are. You've got civil power, military might, giving to the church, and you've got the church giving to the king. So you're beginning to get this interaction between king and power going on here. Mild red herring, but it will be useful later to make a little note of the donation of Constantine. This is a document that's found saying from Constantine to Rome, saying, look, it's okay if you two want to go your own way. Constantine bequeathed Rome and the western part of the empire to the Bishop of Rome when he relocated to Constantinople. All right, it'll be later found to be a forgery, but this is the point where it's found. Other forms of evangelism would be power evangelism. So St. Boniface, also known as Winfrith of Crediton, St. Boniface goes into a pagan tribe in Germany. He chops at an oak tree dedicated to the god Thor, and a breath of wind then blew the tree over. And so the people were wowed by the superior powers of the god of St. Boniface, and he proceeds to chop up the tree and turn and use the wood to make a chapel. So you can either view this as superior powers of an alternative god, or you can see it as a mild element of syncretism, as they reuse that sacred wood for a sacred chapel. Meanwhile, in the east, so in the west, you've got that rise of power, and you've got the Pope and power and military might working quite nicely together. Meanwhile, in the east, you've just got waves of war that seem to sweep over, so that Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem end up in Muslim hands, and all the patriarchs there end up in Constantinople, and that's where they end up. And there's a slight feeling of being feeling abandoned by the West. Where were you? We needed help. Where were you in all of that? And that's not going to help in terms of relations, as we will shortly see. Now, let's just have a little moment to look at some icons, and have a pause at this point to do that. There's a long since been a tradition and an art in putting icons together, but the key person you're looking for here is John of Damascus, John Mansur of Damascus. So there's a period where people are not happy about icons, and they start destroying them. And here I broaden the term icons just to mean any form of statue, art depiction of deity, and so any of that sort of stuff. And some of this is perhaps on account of Muslim influence, the clear depiction, you don't depict God, and here's a depiction of God. Well, then that's just wrong. So some of it is feeling the influence of those local surrounding views, and it takes John of Damascus to step up and say, be careful here, because let's focus on what it is that's saying something about Jesus. So remember when we talked Theotokos, I urged you to say, look, this is really about Jesus, it's not about Mary. Lovely spin-offs for Mary, but it's really about Jesus, and what we're trying to say something about Jesus rather than trying to say something about Mary. Now, here again, we're trying to say something about Jesus. We're not trying to say something about false worship, about idolatry. We're trying to say something about Jesus. And what John of Damascus says is that to deny that an icon could depict Christ was to deny that the material world could be used to show the divine. And of course that is in danger of denying the incarnation. Invisible God is made visible in the flesh of Jesus Christ, who makes his dwelling among us in Jesus. And so if you're saying that we can't paint a picture of Jesus, you need to be careful that you're not also saying that God cannot come in human form in Jesus in the material world. Now this went to a council, 787, the Seventh Ecumenical Council, held in Nicaea, and they said, yeah, it's okay. So icons are deemed to be okay. Icons can be venerated, but only as an aid to worship. Only as an aid to worship. You've got a list here at the bottom of my page 70 of all the ecumenical councils, and a short one phrase summary about what they were about. And on page 8 of 30 you've got a little reminder of what happened in terms of taking the gospel to Russia. But I'll leave it at that, and you can read that later. And shortly we're going to have a chat about, is it good for the church to wield worldly power? See you in a moment.